Welcome to the Art and Garden Lecture Series. We are so happy to have you all with us today. Today we have Jason Reeves from the West Tennessee Research and Education Center with us. He will be giving an abbreviated version of his Pollinator Heroes discussion. I ask that you all can forgive me. I forgot to hit the record button when Jason first began his talk, so we are jumping in after his introduction. We have not missed any of the material. He will be starting with an introduction of annual pollinator plants for the garden.
Growing season. So it goes from seed to seed. So good examples of that is a sunflower. Think about a sunflower. You plant that sunflower in the spring or early summer, and by the end of the season, it has bloomed, it's made a new seed, and it dies. Other good examples of that are zinnias, marigolds. All our vegetables pretty much are annual. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, corn. You plant that seed, it produces flower, it makes seed, and then it dies at the end of the year. And it does not come back from the root. It comes back, it may reseed for you in the garden, but it does not come back from the root. So that's an annual. It goes from seed to seed in a season, and then it dies at the end of the year. So we're going to start, again, following on the handout with some of these. We'll start with flowering okra. And I do have the name of the plant on some of my slides, but not too many of them because I'm not used to doing this over a presentation like this. So normally everybody has the handout in their hand to follow along. So this is flowering okra. It's an old-fashioned plant. Abomoscus is the common name, and it is in the okra family. If you look at that flower there, it looks very much like okra. It also looks like cotton. If you don't know, cotton's in the okra family. But the butterflies love this plant. So if you look, there is the sulfur butterfly coming to the Abomoscus. This is in my front border at my house. Abomoscus will reseed in the garden for you, or you can save the seed as well. Another great pollinator plant is celosia. And celosia has been around for many years. I grew up growing one called coxcomb, and I would take that big flower to the county fair in my grandmother's McCoy vase and enter it in the fair, and I would get first place every year. And we would save the seed, and I had those cones as big as a foot across. They were spectacular. Well, there's 3 different kinds of celosia, and the one you're looking at here is called plume. So there's coxcomb type, plume type you're seeing here, and then I'm going to talk about the wheat type in a few minutes. But this is the plume type, and this is fresh look yellow. There's fresh look gold, fresh look orange, and fresh look red. All of those are good celosias. Really, there's not a bad celosia out there. They're great for cut flowers. It will reseed in the garden. In this picture, you'll see one that actually reseeded in the garden for me. Makes a good cut flower, again, good for pollinator plants. Here in combination with the zinnia, we'll talk about zinnias here in just a minute, a little more, but great plant. And this is late in the season. This is actually the second year when they had reseeded in the garden like crazy for me. And so this is just before frost. And so they're still going on in the garden. And the pollinators, especially the parasitic wasps, will be all over these kind of down low, collecting the pollen off of them and the nectar. So really good for tracking those pollinators, but again, great for a cut flower arrangement as well. In this picture is the wheat type. So the top left side is the wheat type called Art&Garden. This is a new All-American Selection winner. This is taken in the photograph was taken in the garden here last year. And to the right is that fresh look again. So that wheat type, again, looks more like a head of wheat as opposed to the plume or a coxcomb type in the garden. Again, great for cut flowers and great for the pollinators. In the front of that picture is a perennial, actually. This is a garlic chive called geisha. And it is a chive you can eat, but it's flat. Garlic chives are flat, unlike what we typically think of as chive. Very strong. One drawback to garlic chives is they will reseed in the garden, and they can actually be a little bit weedy. So you can cut those flower heads off after they get through flowering to keep the seeds from falling in the garden if you want to do that. So back to the celosia. Here's the Asian garden. It gets pretty big, about 2.5 feet tall by the end of the summer, and a pretty bushy plant. There's about 6 plants planted in this photograph here, again, taken in the garden last year. And again, the pollinators love the celosia. So you see the bumblebees here, and on the right is a beneficial or parasitic wasp that's come to the garden or to the plant to collect the nectar from it. So good plants to have in the garden are the celosias. Again, easy to grow from seed. You can buy a pack of seed and grow them yourself. and they will reseed some for you in the garden as well. I love ornamental peppers. They're not necessarily great pollinator plants, but I just want to mention a couple here just because they're fun plants to have in the garden. Obviously, they get pollinated, so yes, a insect comes to it and pollinates it. So this is sangria in the foreground. Sangria is a non-hot chili pepper. So it was actually bred for Walt Disney World. So it wouldn't be hot. They wanted a chili pepper because chili peppers are tall and slender, and they're held above the foliage really well, but typically hot. And if someone was to touch that pepper and then touch their face, you're going to be regretting it. It's going to be on fire. So they bred one that wasn't hot. It's called sangria. So that's sangria. Another shot of it. And in combination with one of my favorite zinnias, this is Zinnia Zowie Yellow Flame. Zinnia Zowie Yellow Flame is an All-American Selection winner from probably about 10 years ago. It's not a real common zinnia. The seed are a little bit more expensive, and you're probably going to have to mail order it. We do typically have it at our plant sale each year, but you're going to pay a little bit more for the seed or for a plant if you find a plant. It is a more an old-fashioned type zinnia in that it's going to be tall, and it eventually will get powdery mildew and some of the disease problems, but it's usually late in the season before it gets that. But isn't that a great combination? You don't think about putting pink and orange together, but it works really fun on this plant. So again, a good cut flower, also good for pollinators. So now the close-up of it. If you look in the center of the flower, that's actually the true flowers, those little yellow bits that look like a jester's hat. That's actually the flowers. The beautiful parts around the edge are actually the petals. So the pollinator is going to land on those petals and then get the nectar from the flower there. And so those flowers open up slowly from the outside in, so it will continue flowering for quite some time and provide nectar on the plant. Here's the skipper butterfly coming to the Zinnia Zowie Yellow Flame to get the nectar. So fun. This is again from my front border at my house. And then the last shot of it. So again, long stems, good cut flower as far as zinnias go. Back to peppers just a minute. This is one called, I just went blank, sorry. Hot pot, no. Up. Well, I've gone blank on this one. It'll come, it's actually, I don't think I put it on your handout for some reason. Hot Pops is the name of this one. So another one with the peppers held above the foliage and a fun pepper to have in the garden. I'll skip over that. Okay, back to zinnias. So this is Zinnia Zahara Yellow. So the Zahara series and the Profusion series is a series that were bred between Zinnia elegans, which is your tall, old-fashioned garden type zinnias. They crossed those with Zinnia angustifolia, which is called the narrowleaf or Mexican zinnia. And that Mexican zinnia is a compact plant, and it's also resistant to diseases like powdery mildew. So they crossed that little Mexican zinnia with the tall zinnia, and it made a much more compact plant, and it also built in some disease resistance. So Profusion and the Zahara series are compact, and they also are much more tolerant of disease. So they're not the best for cut flowers because the stems are only a couple inches long, but they don't have to be deadheaded. You see in the picture here, the old flowers are actually covered by the new flowers. So you look in the picture, you'll see some old ones down in there, but the new flowers grow over the top of those, so you don't have to deadhead those. If you're going to grow zinnias and you're really trying to encourage the pollinators, you really want to grow, I'll back up, this single flowered type. So you see it has the petals on the outside and the little yellow flowers in the center. And again, that's what attracts the pollinators. So there are a whole series of these. Some are double, as you see in this picture here. This is Zahara Double Fire. If you look in the center of that flower, you really don't see those flowers. There's a few in there, but there's not near as many as there is on that single flowered form. So these are still great to have in the garden, but you won't get as many pollinators on them. So keep that in mind. If you really want to encourage the pollinators, you would want to go with a single flower. And that's true for most single flowers, just not zinnias. Another shot of it in the garden. Again, you can see those old flowers down in there, but the new is growing above, so you don't have to worry about deadheading. Another great annual is Gumfrina, and this is Gumfrina Fireworks. Fireworks has been around at least 10 years now. Gumfrina, of course, is an old-fashioned plant. I grew up growing it in rows in our vegetable garden. My mother and I cut them for arrangements and dried flowers. But a tough plant, very drought tolerant. Here's a close-up of Fireworks. So Fireworks is a little different than your old-fashioned type in that there's multiple heads in the single head on the stem. The flower on the gumfrene is actually the little yellow bit there at the tip. So that's actually the flower. The long tube is a modified petal, I believe. And yeah, the yellow bit is the flower. So if you look at that, it looks like a little explosion going on, fireworks. So that's where it gets its cultivar name. They are great for the pollinators. Here we have a skipper butterfly again on the gumfrene in my garden at home. It will reseed in the garden for you, sometimes more than you would like. And here's a photo of the second year. So the first year I had a few, and the second year I had many. Since then, I begin to pull them, and I kind of keep them at, you know, the right number that I want. This is an overshot. My garden's grown a lot.
What do you want?
But yeah, there's where it's reseeded in the garden. Now, let's talk, while I keep mentioning reseeding on the annuals, let me just talk a little bit about reseeding. If you've got a plant that will reseed, such as the celosia or even zinnias sometimes, or gumfrena, if you expect it to reseed, you can't mulch heavy. If you put a heavy layer of mulch over the area in the spring before those seedlings come up, it's probably going to smother them out just like it smothers weeds. Also, if you put down a pre-emergent herbicide, such as preen, it can also keep those seeds from germinating. So if you've got some annuals, flowers that you want to reseed in the garden, be sure not to mulch too heavy or too early, or put down preen in the garden. Now, though, let me back up. So gumfrena gets big. Each plant can get about 3 feet wide and as much as 2.5 to 3 feet tall. If you don't have room for that, you can go with a cultivar called Truffula. And this is Truffula Pink. Truffula is a new winter cultivar that came out, well, hit the market last year. We had it the year before in the garden. This is Truffula Pink. The advantage to Truffula Pink is that it actually starts blooming at a young age. It will bloom at maybe 4 or 5 inches tall, where the fireworks needs to be more about a foot before it starts flowering. It's more compact overall, so you're going to look at more of an 18-inch plant as opposed to 2.5 to 3 foot plant. So if you don't have a lot of space, you may want to go for Truffula. One disadvantage is it's more expensive because it is grown from tissue culture and cuttings, not from seeds. You're going to pay more for this plant. It also will not reseed in the garden for you. It's sterile from my understanding, and I haven't had it reseed. So there's advantages and disadvantages. You need to choose what works best for you, but this is Truffula Pink. So very similar to fireworks, just a little more compact and starts blooming at an earlier age. Here up the bed, 2 years ago, as you enter the parking lot of the garden where it was planted, and a close-up of it, and then again another skipper type butterfly on the Truffula. So come in to get the nectar. So late in the season, you'll see lots of pollinators on the gumfrena in the garden. I love lantana. If I had to choose one annual for a sunny area, it would be lantana. Lantana is one of the most heat and drought tolerant plants you can possibly have in the garden. It's one of those plants that you could put out by the mailbox where it's typically hot and dry and you oftentimes poor soil. You could water it, you know, once every day for the first week when you go check the mail, and then probably forget it the rest of the year, and it would be there till you get a hard freeze in the fall. Very drought tolerant plant. There's all kinds of lantana. I'm just going to mention a few of these. I've never really met one that I didn't like, except there are a few that are bred to be really compact and little tight balls in the garden, which I'm not so fond of those. But lantana can vary from about a 12 by 12 to 3-4 foot tall and wide. We'll talk about a perennial lantana. I believe I've got it listed. Maybe I don't. There are perennial lantanas. I'll just mention those here. If you're looking for a perennial, it would be Miss Huff and Ham and Eggs, which also sometimes Ham and Eggs is sold as Moselle. Both of those can get 3 to 4 feet tall and wide in the garden. But back to our annual lantana. This is Luscious Lemonade. There's probably 9 plants planted in this area. This is late in the summer, so it does really spread. It also works great in a container. This is Luscious Lemonade. I'm sorry, that was Luscious Lemonade. This is part of the Luscious series. This is, I think this one is Berry. And then we have Marmalade, that's more orange. They all vary a little bit in height. This is Pink Berry Blend. So lots of lantanas. Just pay attention to the tag on how big they get. Some will trail, some are more upright. But again, good plants for pollinators and very heat and drought tolerant plants. Candlestick plant. If you have a grown candlestick plant, this is such a cool plant. Candlestick is Cassia lata. And it's, again, we're talking about annuals, so it's grown from seed. We actually have quite a few of these this year, maybe twice as many as we had last year that we hope to have a little later available. at a plant sale. So this is candlestick at my mother's house in Huntington. Candlestick starts out again from a seed. At the end of the summer, it dies. Unfortunately, our growing season is not long enough in Tennessee for the seed to mature. So you can't save seed from it. You have to order them. We actually order them from California and grow those each year. So candlestick is a legume. If you're not familiar with the legume family, many of the plants in the legume family have leaves that fold up in the evening. And one example of those that you might not think about is the soybean. And the soybean, if you'll notice the soybean field, it changes colors during the day. So if you're looking at a soybean in the field in the summer, it's pretty much a good green color. If you look at it late in the evening, just before dark, it takes more of a blue cast to the field. And it's because the leaves are folded up. On the back side of a soybean leaf is pubescent or hairy, and it's more of a bluish color. So that field will kind of change from a green to a blue over in the evening as those leaves fold up. Well, candlestick plant does the same thing. As it gets nightfall, the leaves fold up on it. And a lot of legumes do that. Mimosa is a legume. And so it's fun to show kids that. So here's the flowers on it. Also, most legumes have a bean or pea-shaped type flower. So there's the flowers on it. It doesn't flower till late in the season. You'll take a plant that's a few inches tall and put it in the garden, and it can be as much as 12 feet tall by the end of the season and as much as maybe 6 or 8 feet wide. Sometimes they do need to be staked because they can blow over in the wind. Here's my mother again back in Huntington in front of her house. So this is probably an August shot. They will begin to start blooming in late August, early September, and then bloom on until frost. So let me back up. There's 3, I think there's just 2 plants, one on the right and one on the left in the photo here. Another shot of it a little bit later in the season. Here in front of the bottle wall before it's begun to bloom, but you can see the height that it's got, and the texture is really fun even before it starts flowering. And then there's the blooms on it a little later in the season. I like candlestick for multiple reasons, but one is it attracts the sulfur butterfly. In the picture you see here on the right side, there's a sulfur butterfly that is found the candlestick plant. And that butterfly is laying eggs. And I wish I had a laser pointer. There's probably some way to do that through here, but I'm not sure. You can't see my mouse, can you, Celeste? Don't think so. If you can see my mouse, the arrow on my mouse, there is an egg here in the photo, and that sulfur butterflies laid that egg. If you look closely at this picture, on the right-hand side, you'll see an egg hanging there on the folded up leaves. And so if you want to find a butterfly egg, the best way to find a butterfly egg is watch for the butterfly kind of flitting along in the garden and landing really quick and taking off. And oftentimes that's what it's doing. It's landing. It won't be on a flower. It's usually on the foliage. It'll land real quick, lay that egg, and fly off and do another one. Butterflies only lay one egg in one spot because when the baby caterpillar eats, hatches, it's very hungry, and if there's other eggs nearby, it will actually eat that egg. So they only lay one at a time, or one in one spot. So if you'll notice that branch there, you'll see the egg on it. If you look carefully on this branch, you can see the egg about midway of the picture hanging there. So this was at my house a couple years ago. I saw that caterpillar egg. I went back a few days later, couldn't find the caterpillar, but obviously had eaten quite a bit off of the foliage. And then a few days later, I went back and it had eaten even more, and I saw the caterpillar. So there's the sulfur butterfly caterpillar feeding on the candlestick plant. Not the prettiest caterpillar. You gotta sort of have to look for it. That little yellow stripe makes it a little bit brighter, but sometimes they're hard to see because it's mostly green. And see, that one's a little bit more dull in the photo there. So then, of course, with all caterpillars, they go through metamorphosis. They go into the chrysalis, and here's the chrysalis hanging on a water spigot at my house. So all butterflies and caterpillars have different kind of chrysalis, and you see how uniquely shaped and colored this is for the sulfur butterfly. Moving on to another plant. This is Mexican heather. I'm sorry, Kufia, bat face. This is bat face Kufia. I love Kufia of all sorts. Bat face gets its common name because if you look closely at the flower, you can see the ears like a bat and the purple part there with the actual flower part sticking out, looking like the face of the bat. Bat face Kufia, as all Kufias, is very heat and drought tolerant. We plant it in the parking lot here each year in some of the island beds. It's right on the asphalt, and it doesn't skip a beat in the garden. Grows great in containers as well, spilling over the side of the edge. So again, we're talking about annuals, plants that complete their life cycle in a growing season, so you'd have to replant these each year. If you're not familiar with Kufia, many of you, if you've been gardening very long, you will know of Mexican heather, which is certainly not a heather at all, but it's got that common name. It is a Kufia as well, and the pollinators come to it. Here we've got a bee, a bumblebee on the Mexican heather. So there's Mexican heather. This is a Kufia called Starfire Pink, one we propagate and sell to our plant sales. This one gets about 18 to 24 inches tall. On occasion, it will come back if we have a mild winter. I'm hoping it will have come back this winter. Our winter was certainly mild, although it was wet, and wet's not so good for plants either. They can rot in the wintertime. So this is Starfire Pink, and there's that bee, the honeybee, coming to it. Now, with a flower like the Kufia that has a long corolla or a long tube, the mouth part of the bee can't reach back to where the nectar is, so they cheat sometimes. And so this bee has actually sticking its mouth part through the flower itself and getting right to the goods, going right to the nectar and sucking the nectar out. So it's not actually pollinating the plant because the pollen is more at the opening part of the flower, not at the back. But it's still getting nectar, and that's, of course, we're wanting to provide nectar to the insects as well. The bat face that I started with is probably my favorite Kufia, but if I had to choose a second favorite, it would be Vermilion Air. And Vermilion Air is a proven winter plant that's been out about 3 years, and it is a fantastic plant. It is listed as zone, I think zone 8, but if you plant 6 or 8 of them, about 50% of them will come back depending how cold the winter it was, and again about drainage. So we did have a wet winter, but if you had them planted in a well-drained site, most likely they'll come back. Now they're not going to come up until it gets really hot, so you may not see them sometimes until sometime in May. So don't give up just yet. You know, you can cut the plant back if it's still there, and hold off until it gets warm, and hopefully it'll come back. So this is Vermilion Air. Again, those long tubes, kind of a reddish orange color. Here the sulfur butterflies, again, back at my house are feeding on the nectar coming from it. You know, a butterfly has a long mouth part, so it can reach the back of that tube and get the nectar out. So another shot of that sulfur butterfly. And of course, it's also a great plant for attracting the hummingbirds to the garden. So it's got that long tongue that can reach back in there and get the nectar from the plant. So look for Vermilion Air Kufia, again, a proven winter plant that's done really well for us and can come back depending on the winter and how wet we are. Butterfly weed. I want to talk about 2 annual butterfly weeds. So again, we're talking about annuals, plants that you would grow from seed or you'd buy a plant and it would die at the end of the season. So it's not going to come back from the root. Both of these butterfly weeds will reseed for you in the garden. And this is Asclepias physocarpa, known as swan butterfly weed. It goes by a couple other names, Harry Ball's family jewels. It's a really cool plant. And these are the seed pods that you're seeing on the plant here. So it forms these seed pods late in the season. Inside that pod is a typical Asclepias-shaped seed pod with the seeds in it. Again, you can save those seeds or you can let them fall to the ground and reseed. The flowers are not overly showy on swan butterfly weed, but they're white and again, attract the pollinators. But of course, you're really growing this for the monarch caterpillars to feed on the foliage. So there's a close-up of the flowers. High-end florists will use this in arrangements. They strip all the leaves off and just use the seed pods in arrangements. So it's kind of fun to use indoors, and it lasts a long time in a cut arrangements as well. And of course, there's that monarch caterpillar that's feeding on the Asclepias or the butterfly weed. So we grow that mainly for that caterpillar to have food. So there's the caterpillar. The other Asclepias I want to talk about is Asclepias curvassica, and this is known as annual butterfly weed, sometimes called tropical butterfly weed. Again, it's not hardy in our area, so you would replant it or it would reseed for you in the garden. So there's the monarch caterpillar, of course, feeding on the monarch butterfly, getting the nectar from the flower, and then it comes to the plant to also lay eggs. So in the photo here, on the right-hand photo, is of it at my house where the caterpillars have stripped all the foliage off. One reason I like to grow these annual butterfly weeds is that I can get a lot in my garden. They don't take a lot of space up. They grow really fast. They produce a ton of foliage. And once the caterpillar's eaten all the foliage off, it reproduces or produces a new crop of foliage really quick in the garden, unlike our perennial butterfly weeds. And I'm going to talk about one of those when I get down to the perennials. But unlike those, they're much slower to produce new leaves. So I like to mix these in the garden as well as the perennials to have lots of food for those caterpillars. So there's that monarch again. Look at all the pollen on the back of its wings there. So we'll go back. You saw this picture when I first started out. This is me gathering the monarch caterpillars up and moving them to another location in the garden. And I will do that when they've eaten all the foliage off a plant. And so at my house and here at the UT Gardens, we have butterfly weeds scattered about the garden. So when they've eaten all the foliage off of a plant, then, or grouping of plants, we will collect those and move them to other plants that have not been eaten up yet. So they've got plenty of food to feed on. So a lot of fun with that. So here we are moving some around. You know, this guy moved in, and before it even got off my hand, it was so hungry it started feeding on the new leaf that I was taking it to. You know, when a milkweed or butterfly weed is prone to having aphids, and you can see the aphids along with this caterpillar here. There's more aphids. You can see the caterpillar on the right-hand upper leaf there. Obviously, you don't want to spray for aphids because you're going to kill the caterpillar as well. You wouldn't want to use an organic spray either. The best way to control the aphids is take a water hose and wash them off, but also you can smush them with your hands. Do be careful if you're doing that. There can be little baby monarchs. If you look in the picture here, you see lots of little babies in that photo, and it's easy to knock those off as well. If you look closely in the center of this photo, right to the center of the plant, you can see a tiny little baby caterpillar, and if you were to hit that with a stream of water, you know, it would fall off and it probably wouldn't survive either. So be careful when you're doing that. Look in the photograph here. There's 3 different caterpillars. There's one closest to my thumb, and then one to the left of that, and then the bigger guy there. So, you know, they start out tiny. Here again, I'm collecting them. This is actually at my house. They had run out of food a couple years ago, and I collected those and brought them to work, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and so I recruited some help. This is Aniston and Richard, and we moved those to plants here that didn't have caterpillars on them. So you just have to go from milkweed to milkweed, Asclepias to Asclepias. You know, they're not going to feed on any other plants. So moving them around to where they have got plenty of food. Here is the chrysalis of the monarch caterpillar hanging again back at my house under the water spigot. Not sure why they like this area, but they do. Typically, they don't do their thing on the same plant they're feeding on because, again, a caterpillar can come along and actually eat this chrysalis as well. So here we've got one on the backside of a canna. Here at work, they tend to cross the parking lot where we have lots of Asclepias growing, climb up into the gazebo and go up to the rafters and do their thing up there. So kind of cool hanging there. We really need a caterpillar crossing sign in the garden here or in the parking lot as they move over to the gazebo. Here we've got one hanging in the garden, and you can see as it begins to get close to hatching, it will turn dark. Here's one on the back of a leaf a few years ago outside my office, and I watched it every day. And you see, it got clear there, and you could see the wings through it. I didn't catch it actually hatching, but I catch it shortly after it came out. You don't want to mess with the butterfly when it hatches. You know, don't want to touch it. It has to hang straight down and let the abdomen pump fluid into the wings, and the wings harden. So you don't want to mess with one. And even after, you know, it's matured, if you touch a butterfly, it has a tendency to knock the scales off of it, which keeps it from being able to fly properly. One enemy, if you want to call it that, to the monarch caterpillar is the tussock moth. The tussock moth caterpillar is a friendly caterpillar. You can play with this. It's fuzzy, doesn't hurt you, but it lays a whole bunch of eggs, and it competes for the monarch for food. So here we've got down to this branch, and there's not much left, and the tussock moth caterpillar is competing with that monarch. Well, this is what the tussock moth looks like. So if I've got to choose between the two, I tend to go with the monarch, and I will squishy those tussock moth caterpillars and get rid of some of those in the garden if there's not enough food for both. One way to notice caterpillars in the garden if you don't actually see them on a plant is look for the poop. Here we've got frass. This is on my deck at my home a couple years ago. So the poop, saw this first, and then I saw the caterpillar, which is a tomato hornworm, and it was feeding on a million bell or calibracoi, which is the same family as tomato, and I had never seen one on a calibracoi. I decided not to kill this because this becomes the hawk moth that it pollinates your not blooming plants like your moonvine and your brommansia, trumpet flower. So I actually moved that caterpillar to a big patch of petunias and let it continue in the garden, so I would end up with the moth. So this is the monarch caterpillar. I just want to quickly show you the difference between a monarch and a swallowtail. So the monarch has these black appendages on each end of it. They don't hurt you. You can touch them. You can pet them. This is the swallowtail caterpillar. It does not have those black appendages. A swallowtail has a defense mechanism with it that when you touch the caterpillar, it puts out these stink horns. And there's the stink horns. It emits a smell, kind of a yellow gelatinous looking appendage. And the idea is when the bird or something comes along, the predator, it shoots those out, which is bright and it's kind of scary, also emitting the smell, and hopefully they will release the insect or release the caterpillar. So you can pet them gently and it will do this, and it's fun to show children that, as I'm doing here with Aniston here feeding on fennel in the garden. Just a little bit about a few herbs, most herbs just quickly. Parsley, dill, rue, and fennel is what you would grow to attract the parsley swallowtail to the garden. Here they're feeding on parsley. Here we got two swallowtails mating, the parsley swallowtail. Feeding on fennel, again on fennel. Bronze fennel, they don't feed on it as much as they do green fennel, but they will feed on bronze fennel. Bronze fennel is also nice ornamental to have. This is rue. I will caution you, if you grow rue, it can cause contact dermatitis. So if you get the sap on you, it can cause these blisters. Not everybody's allergic to it, but lots of people are. So be very careful with rue in the garden. But the swallowtail does feed on it as well. It's also a perennial. Here's the chrysalis on the swallowtail. If you look at the bottom of the chrysalis, you can see its exoskeleton from the caterpillar itself. So it left that skeleton behind. Here's another picture of a swallowtail caterpillar chrysalis, or butterfly chrysalis, and the exoskeleton hanging there on it. Well, that's a little bit about some herbs you can grow. Warrior onion, I want to mention this because I love this plant. It's not a good pollinator plant necessarily, but I love it because it's a great onion we grow from seed and we sell at our plant sales. It's a late season shot. Beautiful onion to have in the landscape. It's considered a spring onion, but it's so pretty we leave it in the garden. Keeps that glaucous blue foliage all summer long. I like it planted where it's coming through other plants in the garden. Here in containers in the parking lot, this is an August shot. Gives us that spiky texture, and again, it keeps that blue color throughout the summer. So warrior onion. And then fennel. This is a great fennel to have in the garden. I'm sorry, I don't have this on your handout, or the name of this fennel. This is Antares, like the Greek god. Antares fennel. It's a bulbous fennel that actually does well in the South. Most bulbous fennel does not. So it produces that bulb-like structure at the base that you can eat. Has a little sweet licorice flavor to it. But I grow it for that as well as for the caterpillar. It also works great in containers as well. So Antares fennel. And here's a late season shot of the caterpillars. They've eaten all the foliage off and they're now eating the bulbous part down at the base. So great for those swallowtail caterpillars. Real quick, a vegetable that one of my favorite peppers is sweet sunset. This is the late season where I've harvested them and putting them in the freezer. So look for sweet sunset pepper. Again, not necessarily a pollinator plant, but a good plant to have in the garden. All right, on to perennials. This is Dutchman's pipe, white vein Dutchman's pipe, Aristoloca fimbriata. It is a perennial in the garden. It will also reseed for you in the garden, but it attracts those pipe vine swallowtails that I mentioned earlier. And so here's one of the swallowtails feeding on it. Here's the flower. The bloom is kind of down on the foliage. You don't always see it. It looks a little bit like a pipe that you would smoke. So Dutchman's pipe. So fun flower to have. Got to kind of look for it, but you're attracting those swallowtail, the pipe vine swallowtails to the garden. And there's a picture of the pipe vine swallowtail. Another good perennial, of course, is our native Asclepias tuberosa. This is the butterfly weed you'd see on the side of the road or in your fields or pastures. Love this plant. For me, it's short-lived here in the gardens and at UT as well. It seems to get maybe 3 years out of it. I think it actually does better in poor, dry soil as opposed to where we're irrigating, where we've enriched the soil greatly. Tends to make it a little short-lived. But I love this plant for the orange foliage, or orange flower. Again, when the caterpillar eats all the foliage off this, it's much less likely to rebound quickly in the garden. Some years it doesn't actually put out new foliage to the following year. So that's why I grow those annuals along with it. So again, we're moving some around in the garden in the photos here. There's a seed pod. All Asclepias has a seed pod very much like this one here. So beautiful seed that float around in the garden and will seed for you as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention, perennial is a plant that comes back year after year. So it's going to come back from the root or even the stem. And we don't think about it, but trees and shrubs are actually perennials too. So the plants we're talking about right now are all perennials. So they're going to be in the garden for years to come. This is Phlox Mini Pearl. Mini Pearl is a great garden performer with those flat flowers, good cut flowers that you have each year in the garden. And will be in the garden for years to come. So if you, after Mini Pearl flowers, if you'll cut it back and give it a good dose of fertilize, it will actually flower for you again. So you can give it like a Miracle Grow water soluble fertilize. This is Mini Pearl, again, great for the pollinators. Here I've got Mini Pearl and Wanda planted together in my garden, and then it reseeded. There's actually one plant of each in this garden at my house, and I got all these seedlings that come up. So if you look, there's different shades of pinks and kind of bluey purples and whites in there. So here's another shot of it. So again, I started with a plant of Wanda, which is the deep purple in the picture, and one white, and they got together and made seed, and they've come up all along in the garden here. So Wanda's a great phlox to have as well in the garden for those butterflies. My favorite salvia is Salvia Amistad. I've actually taken all my Salvia Gregii, such as Salvia Gardenica, such as black and blue, out of my garden at home and replaced it with Amistad. It's just a little bit better, blooms better for me. Amistad is a southern living plant. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall. Again, it's a perennial. The clump gets bigger each year in the garden, and it makes a good cut flower as well as a good plant for the butterflies and pollinators in the garden. And here's a couple shots of it in the landscape here in front of the bottle wall several years ago with the cannas in the background there and the luscious lemonade lantana in the foreground. All right, on to some shrubs that are good for pollinators. This is Vitex Chase Tree. This is one called Shoal Creek. Shoal Creek is a very heat and drought tolerant, or Vitex in general is, shrub to have. Shoal Creek has these large butterfly bush type blooms on it. It can be trimmed up like a crepe myrtle in the landscape, so free-formed, much like a crepe myrtle. So this is a big guy. If you're looking for smaller ones, you can look for Delta Blue, is a little bit smaller. Blue Diddley, even smaller, more like 6 feet, and Blue Puffball is 3 to 4 feet in the landscape. So this is Delta Blue here, so it'll eventually probably be about 10 feet tall. But Blue Diddley on your handout, and Blue Puffball is more compact form. Here is Blue Puffball. If you want one, don't have room for a big tall one in the garden. So again, very heat and drought tolerant, great for the pollinators. Hollies, we don't often think about as being good for pollinators, but they do. Are blooming right now in the landscape, and the bees are all over them if you go out and look. So this is winterberry holly, winter red, and winter red is a deciduous holly. All the winterberries are deciduous. You need a male pollinator to go along with them, and winter red is pollinated by southern gentlemen. And here's a picture of it in Huntingdon at some friend's house along the retaining wall. So the leaves fall off in the wintertime and leave these beautiful red berries. Close up of it. And this is winter gold, which is also pollinated by southern gentlemen. And a close up of it. Here's a shot. It's hard to see. I don't have a pointer here, but this is at the Bass Pro Shop at the Gatlinburg exit. And there's a male holly in there. If you look near those pontoon boats, you'll see a holly that doesn't have any berries on it. That's the male pollinator. Only takes one male for a whole bunch of females. So the bees fly from one to the other and will spread that pollen around, get those in the garden. This is one called Whoa Nelly, and we love it for the gold foliage, and one we have at our plant sales some year. It does get big. This would be a good spring planting. This is at the University of Georgia's trial garden. We have one growing in the garden here. So look for Whoa Nelly, that beautiful gold foliage. Again, when it flowers, it's going to have attract the pollinators. Edgeworthia paperbush is a wonderful shade plant. Blooms early in the season, January, February. Unfortunately, the cold snap we had in November, the severe cold snap, really hurt the buds on them. The buds form in the fall and hang on all winter. And so we didn't get good flowering this year. But here's a late summer shot. The flower buds already forming, the beautiful leaves with that blue cast. The water stands up on the leaves like mercury does, and is really fun just in foliage as well as when it's in flower. And here we have a shot. This one used to be outside my office window, and it got so big I couldn't get the window, and I actually had to dig it up and move it. But that's a February shot. Very fragrant. best in mornings, or we can tolerate morning sun, but definitely needs afternoon shade and good draining soil. Again, doesn't mind the cold, doesn't mind the snow, but if you have a real severe cold, and especially a drying wind, can be harmful to it. So there's a close-up of the pitch of the flower. And here, look at the bee on this one. This was in February of last year, and there's the bee. Look at the pollen sacs on its legs there. So fun to have Edgeworthia in the landscape. And here's the bee coming to it. So one of the early plants to bloom to get those early season bees. Hibiscus, I love roses Sharon, but you know, the old-fashioned ones were not as good as the newer ones, and this is one called Purple Pillar, and it's a tall, slender hibiscus. It's going to end up being 15 or more feet tall in the landscape. Has these beautiful red, purple flowers. Believe it or not, I see hummingbirds on this, and of course, bees and butterflies as well. Here it is in front of the building a couple years ago. Originally, it said it was going to be 2 feet wide. Well, it's going to be more like 3, 4 feet wide. You can trim it to keep it narrow if you would like. It's not sterile like some of the new cultivars, but we've only had a few seedlings come up. So they are breeding some of them to be sterile, so you don't have seeds of this come up. But we've only had a few for this one, so I don't think it has many fertile flowers to it. So this is, again, Purple Pillar. Again, great for attracting the pollinators, full sun, drought tolerant. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. All right, our last shrub is Spirea thunbergii ogon. This is more like the old bridal wreath spirea, but it's a gold foliage form. In the background is a loropetalum called zuzia, but look at that beautiful gold foliage. Here it is at my mother's house, blooming in late January and February each year with the beautiful white flowers. Again, the bees are all over this because there's not much blooming that time of year. So that's an early season shot. Here we've got a midsummer shot with that gold foliage. And then we have a winter or fall shot, which turns orange in the winter time. So good fall and winter gets good fall color. That fall color sometimes hangs on a little bit long for me. Sometimes at Christmas it's still orange, and I'm like, it's time for you to fall off. Here it is in flower. Here in the gardens in Jackson, up against the back of the parking lot near a lamppost. So when it blooms, it's a profusion of white flowers, and then again that fall color on it. So look for Spirea thunbergii. Again, a good sun-loving plant, very drought tolerant. And ogon is the cultivar. Ogon just means gold. All right, we're going to finish up with a few hydrangeas here. So hydrangeas, we're going to talk about two kinds, the ones that prefer sun and the ones that prefer shade. And so this is hydrangea paniculata. Paniculata is a sun-loving hydrangea. And the first one that came to market that really brought hydrangeas back around was called Limelight. And so Limelight to me is kind of like saying Kleenex. Everybody knows what you're talking about if you've been gardening very long. So this is Limelight. Again, the paniculatas are best in full sun. They're okay if they get at least 6 hours of sun, but they're not really good in the shade. If you're looking for a paniculata for the pollinators, you want to go with one with a more open flower like you see here. And this is one called Quickfire. And Quickfire is one of the older cultivars. It blooms a little bit earlier than some of the other cultivars. So there's the swallowtail butterfly on Quickfire. Here's a picture of Quickfire in the landscape. Again, has more open flower. Let me back up to that. So the big white bits are really just colorful petals. They're not actual flower parts that have the sexual parts sitting on where the pollen and the nectar is. So you see the little white, smaller bits below those big white petals. That's what the butterfly's after. So you want to go with one that.
I got nothing.
What's that? So there's Quickfire. A shot of it. So again, it blooms a little bit earlier. There's a vitex in the background behind this one. This is Baby Lace. This is bred by Michael Dirt. It's a little bit more compact. Again, it has a more open panicle.
It didn't do that before.
So there's Baby.
His mouth's moving.
Tardiva is an older
cultivar
that's
like
been around for years.
I don't.
Tardiva has been around for a long time. And one of the older cultivars, again, a more open flower. Pink Diamond and Pinky Winky are also two good cultivars with that more open flower, again, for attracting those pollinators. And then on to the hydrangeas that prefer shade or partial shade. So this is Macrophylla, meaning large leaf hydrangea. And then there's also Serrata we'll talk about in a minute. Both of those do best in morning sun and afternoon shade. Both of those, the Macrophylla and the Serrata, are affected by the pH. The paniculata we talked about doesn't matter what you do to the soil, it's always going to be white or limey green. It's not going to be pink or blue, depending on the pH. So again, looking for these more open blooms to attract the pollinator. This is Endless Summer Twist and Shout. So Twist and Shout is a lace cap. If you look in the photo here, you can see the fertile flowers. The true flowers are there in the center, and that's where the pollinators come to. those big showy petals around the outside, there's not much there for the pollinators. So again, if you're wanting pollinators, look for those with the more open flower or head, lace cap type. So Inland Summer Twist and Shout is a good one for that. And then the Serrata, so known as the mountain hydrangea, and the Tough Stuff series is really good. The Tough Stuff series is that lace cap type as you see in the photo here, and so there's a lot more fertile flowers to it. Again, these are all affected by the pH. That's a whole nother talk altogether. Just enjoy what color nature makes it according to the soil. And a few shots of it. This is one called Tough Stuff Aha with its double flower. So look for those hydrangeas if you're looking for pollinators to have those in the garden. This ends my pollinator talk. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I think we have some questions. I know a lot of people, it's 1 o'clock, will have other things they need to do, but I will continue on if it's okay and maybe answer some questions that Celeste has had submitted. Again, I want you to visit our gardens. You know, this may not be the ideal time to come out, but you can come some other time. You can also follow me on Facebook at Jason Reeves in the garden. You can also follow the UT Gardens in Jackson, in Crossville, and in Knoxville on their pages where we're posting things about the garden and lots of beauty in the garden and events that we have throughout the year. I hope everybody stays safe, stay home, stay in your garden. It's a great time to garden, and enjoy the season and the beauty of the time this year. Thank you.